What if the FF7 Remake story is not a sequel after all, and not different at all to the original? What if there are no new timelines? What if Zack, Biggs, and Aerith are still dead, and everything is playing out exactly the same? What does this mean for things like defying destiny and fate, and that whole last chapter in Remake, which still doesn't make any sense to any of us? I know it sounds silly and strange at this point, but let's start right here, in the scene where we are served this amazing soundtrack, by the way, this space between a universe of death and one of creation. The fact that this void between universes and destinies even exists basically guarantees that the story is different, right? Well, okay, but there is one issue with this. We've already experienced this scene, or at least a variation of it, and if you've played the original, then you definitely know what I'm talking about. That final fight at the end, which is all about Cloud's spiritual journey, purging his mind from Sephiroth's control, rather than the universe or destiny. This segment plays out differently in Remake, and of course it does, because Cloud is not ready at this point in the story to release himself from Sephiroth yet. This is not new and is extremely consistent with the spirit of the 1997 game. But what does this scene tell us about everything that Remake wants us to believe in? That rather than being about Cloud himself and his consciousness, this space is now about universes, timelines, and possibly a different conclusion to the FF7 universe. In fact, how did we even go from a simple and powerful story that conveyed its themes extremely well to this super complicated multiverse where death doesn't even mean a thing anymore? My answer to this question is that we never did. We're simply looking at the story all wrong. Nothing has changed at all. And instead of being an underwhelming sequel, Remake is, in my opinion at least, an extremely ambitious and immersive retelling of one of the greatest video game stories ever.
What do you make of this, Cloud? Is any of it real? Or is it all just a fever dream?
And I will actually start with a disclaimer here, because at this point, I'm not even sure that the edge of creation alone is enough to challenge what we believe about the Remake story. It's easy to say, for instance, that we just never got a clear official confirmation on what that scene really meant even back in the original, or to imagine that they left it there to prepare for the Remake trilogy 30 years later. I'm personally not buying that, but I understand why people think this way, because we've just been programmed for the past 5 years to believe that the story is different and that characters can somehow come back to life now. So, if I'm gonna convince you of anything, I need to get you to the same place where I am today, questioning a lot of what we've seen before and how it's explained. This means not only going against the majority of theories online, but also some of the official explanations such as the Ultimanias, which for me are actually part of the issue here, because they're great at showing you things that you've missed in-game, which you were supposed to ask questions about, but absolutely terrible in giving you answers on mysteries that you should not know at this point. A good example of that being that we're not supposed to know that Cloud was not an ex-soldier at this point in the story, so the Ultimanias are not gonna just spoil that for us. But we still have to start somewhere, right? And the thing is, I have so many questions about the changes in Remake that I still have not been able to find answers to. With the first one being, what was actually wrong with the original story to begin with? Final Fantasy VII was never about changing fate or defying destiny. It was actually a video game that portrayed extremely deep themes for its time and made people see that this medium can convey super serious and impactful messages. Its whole story revolves around how we actually deal with loss and move on, rather than trying to resist it. And the thing I'm struggling to understand here is why we think that Square would come 25 years later and immediately decide to undermine all of that. Or why they would choose FF7 of all the games they have in the franchise and decide to go against everything it ever stood for. I'm even seeing people online speculating about the possibility of multiple endings in Part 3, which for me is just entirely missing the point of what the story is at its essence. Having already had this conversation with people in the past, the answer seems to be that this is just bad writing probably, or that they're making it up as they go, just like they did in the original game even. But seriously, let's be honest for a second, let's stop here. I mean, people are entitled to their own opinions, of course, but I personally cannot understand how you can like the world of FF7, play these two remakes, and still tell me that this project is anything but a love letter to the original game and even the whole Final Fantasy franchise. The size of the open world, the attention to detail, the fidelity to characters, the world building, this is clearly done by people who respect that game and really care about it. Another way to look at it is that if you think that Remake is telling a different story or that it takes place in a different world, then this vision creates a big paradox, because you can't possibly keep the original world canon if you believe that Sephiroth is rewriting timelines, or that there is a infinity of worlds, as the game wants us to believe at a certain point. If this is true, then a lot of the things we experienced in the original game do not matter anymore. And that 97 version of the story is now just a dream world or livestream memory or whatever they want us to believe it is. And if you still buy into that, then okay, the trilogy clearly wants you to, but my opinion is that there is zero chance that they would undermine the original game in its themes, and that again, the 97 story would be not canon anymore. So this is why I think we should go about it differently. Remember how I said earlier that I need to get you in the same state of mind that I am in terms of interpreting this remake. Let me present to you all the questions that I personally have around very weird and questionable sequences in Remake and Rebirth, which in my opinion are pointing to a completely different yet very simple explanation than what we all thought. Going back to the essence of the Final Fantasy VII story again, those themes of life, death, grief and loss, no one embodies them better than the main character, Cloud. His whole arc can basically be interpreted as stages of grief, if you want. Cloud is also an extremely unreliable narrator, as we know, but the thing is, it seems to me that Remake and Rebirth have taken this specific aspect and magnified it a million times. The way I interpret this trilogy is that it's probably simply us experiencing the FF7 story from inside Cloud's completely messed up and broken mind. Now, I know that you might think this is an exaggeration and that Cloud can't possibly be this unreliable, and this is where we start talking about those weird things that he and we go through during the game. First of all, in that Singularity segment at the end of Remake, which is supposedly about defying fate and destiny, why is Cloud transported 3 different times by himself, leading to the whole environment changing whenever that happens? That whole Singularity sequence starts with him seeing an illusion of Sephiroth and following him, because of course he does, and it ends with this famous one-on-one scene at the edge of creation. But even in the Singularity, we again see the whole environment change once Cloud hears Sephiroth's voice inside his own head.
I'm waiting, Cloud.
If we rewind a bit, why is the whole party exposed to a memory that is extremely linked to Cloud's past and trauma, Zack's last stand at the expressway? This memory seems to be central to everything that is happening in Singularity, but why is that the case? Why would destiny and saving the planet be about Zack's fate, when we know what he represents to Cloud specifically at this point in the game? And if we do believe that the Singularity events are objectively true, then why does all of what happens there only lead to changing fates that are, once again, extremely important to Cloud himself? First one being saving Zack in Remake, and then Aerith later on in Rebirth. Think also about all the major deviations happening in both games. Why do they always take place right after Cloud has these visions of Sephiroth and follows him? The Singularity in Remake, as we said, Tifa at the Gongaga reactor, the Cave of the Gi, and the Forgotten Capital, of course. Even characters which seem to have little impact on the plot raise a lot of questions, with Biggs being one for instance. He dies in 2 different locations, right? First in the pillar and then inside the reactor in Rebirth. If all of those dream worlds are once again objective, planet, livestream realities or whatever, and that they're not intimately linked to Cloud's perception, then why do we see this same Biggs dying in those same 2 locations in Cloud's trial? A sequence that is all about him repressing death and feeling nothing. Why does no other notable character talk about any timelines throughout the whole game, except for Cloud himself?
Got sent to another world. Apparently, there's at least a few more than one.
Is that right?
And let's go back to Tifa's incident, for instance. Why would Bugenhagen, the wise scholar who has dedicated his whole life to studying the livestream and the planet, dismiss everything that Tifa tells him about her experience, telling her that it's probably just quote-unquote
Mako poisoning?
Why does she even experience her childhood memories inside that livestream sequence from Cloud's point of view? Why do we see Cloud himself actually create one of these so-called dream worlds in the flesh when he saves Aerith later on in Rebirth? The biggest clue in my opinion is the following. Why do we see Cloud's consciousness shift between these dream worlds not once, but 2 different times in the gold saucer, even hearing the words of Terrier Zack inside his own head at one point.
Sorry, man. Feel like I failed you. Sorry, man. Feel like I failed you.
Regardless of what we think we know about the remake story at this point and where we think it's headed, I believe that these segments should at least make us question what is going on with Cloud here. And I'm aware there's a lot of stuff to unpack in what we just talked about, so let's focus on the things that really matter when it comes to the Retrilogy story being different compared to the original game. Despite all the changes, in my opinion, we can group everything under 2 brackets. First one is scenes which play out considerably differently compared to the original game, and the second one is the new Dream Worlds, where seemingly some important characters have a different fate. So let's start with the first portion, going straight to the Singularity in Remake. The end of chapter 18 is where things get really messy and basically the story completely loses us. This is a section that 1 was not at all in the original game, and 2 seems to have huge consequences according to what the game itself wants to tell us. And the trigger is what I mentioned in the previous section. Cloud by himself seeing Sephiroth and stopping at the expressway. Except, we have this great shot behind him which clearly shows that this might have been just a hallucination, followed by the disappearing black feather into the ground, something that we've already seen a couple of times before, mainly indicating Sephiroth's presence of course. So, the major shift that happens here that we see in the expressway, leading to these changes and defying destiny, very likely starts with this illusion and one of Cloud's many mental episodes. There is this conversation between the party, mainly Aerith and Cloud on one side and Sephiroth on the other, and we see the whispers form in this wall or portal or whatever it is, which interestingly is right at the moment and location when we are about to leave Midgar, a key detail. Let's just keep it in mind for now. Sephiroth is being all cryptic and stuff, but the one thing that never really made any sense to me, as I said before, from the first playthrough, is why does Zack's last stand even appear here? It just did not make any sense at this point in the game, especially that there was not even any preparation for it before in Remake, and that is why most of us probably were confused and maybe felt that this is just unnecessary or just fan service for the sake of it. Sephiroth creates a fracture within the Whisper Wall made up of these memories, including that of Zack, and seemingly invites Cloud to join him. We have Aerith on the other side hesitating at first, but then asking everyone to help her after casting some sort of white spell on this portal, something that she will also do later in Rebirth, at the Forgotten Capital. They all enter the portal, and this is where things get really tricky. Because of all the action and events inside the Singularity, we never actually stop to understand what really happens, and how everything changes depending on Cloud's reaction, almost every single time. We're basically, in my opinion, inside the singularity of Cloud's mind here, rather than that of the fate or the planet or destiny or whatever. As I said before, there are a few switches that happen here which are easy to miss. The first one happens after crossing into the singularity. Nothing happens for a while, but Cloud is then taken away and suddenly unconscious and transported somewhere else. This is literally a first instance of his consciousness traveling somewhere else. This animation here with him falling from above, unconscious, is very reminiscent of other segments where he goes through this spiritual journey, like he did back in the OG ending for instance, and also something similar to what he and Zack will actually do later in Rebirth when traveling between worlds. The second shift is right after defeating the Harbinger and seeing all of these visions, where we zoom inside Cloud's mind and see him travel once again to this initially white space, which is then invaded by Sephiroth. A very key detail here, as we said before, is that Sephiroth's meteor illusion or demonstration only happens once Cloud hears his voice inside his own head. Another great thing to point out, which likely hints that the illusions happening at the end of Remake are somewhat similar to the ones happening at the end of Rebirth, is that Cloud goes through an extremely similar process before he enters the Forgotten Capital, with Sephiroth appearing the same way, saying the same line, showing the same illusions, except for those frightening words that he says to Aerith, of course.
Good, Aerith. Pray.
Back to Remake, the third switch, and final one, is the edge of creation itself. Nothing major to highlight here, as it's quite clear that Cloud's consciousness once again travels somewhere else, except maybe the fact that it all happens right after this big explosion, heavily implied to be fate being breached or these alternative worlds being created as a result of what Cloud and the party do inside the Singularity. Mind you, even those future memories that are supposedly shown to the party when fighting the Harbinger are almost all experienced through Cloud himself, as we either zoom in inside his head or we focus on how he reacts afterwards. This will happen quite a few times, as you will see in the next few scenes. At one point, we even see him react the exact same way, using the exact same animation to two different visions. You would think that this would at least be scrutinized a bit more by the staff, unless it's intentional, of course. But anyway. Other than the content of the memory itself, as we of course see Red 13 in one of them, there is actually only one other instance where we're not shown that these visions are inside Cloud's mind, and that's Tifa here, seeing Meteor. Why would Tifa see it is still a major question to me personally, but we have to keep in mind that she also sees through realities at the Forgotten Capital later in Rebirth, and that she also falls in a pool of Mako, of course. See, again, the thing is, after we really dive inside the Singularity and after what we've seen, it looks more and more likely that the whole segment is actually much more about Cloud's perception, his memory of Zack, his consciousness shifting between spaces and shaping the whole environment around him, rather than anything bigger such as the fate of the planet as it's presented to us. Now, I'm aware we're still very early in the story here to say that this is 100% all inside Cloud's mind, but a key moment which for me really reinforces that is, let's go back to it, Zack's memory, which is front and center to this wall of whispers, to this Singularity sequence, and I really think we need to rewind and ask the question of why Cloud or even the party see it here and what Zack's existence or lack thereof is supposed to represent. Let's talk about the song Hollow, which plays at the end of Remake, and its meaning. Of course, it's clearly about Cloud, as the writers themselves confirmed that. It was even named Hollow Clouds at one point, it seems. But when it comes to its deeper meaning and making sense of the lyrics, it seems like there are multiple interpretations. The majority seems to think that it's Cloud's feelings for Aerith, given that it plays in the Sector 5 portion when she isn't with Cloud anymore. But the thing is, why would this song be about Cloud and Aerith when nothing has happened to her yet? Why would a modified version of it play later in Rebirth when you come back to the edge of Midgar? And more importantly, if it is about Aerith, then why does it play in this cutscene at the end of Remake, which is clearly about Zack's fate and his importance to the story? This feels more like a song about someone feeling empty, as the lyrics suggest, after a loved one passed away, someone that was very important to them. If this song was played at the end of Rebirth, of course, all of the above works for Aerith, but not now. When it comes to Zack, however, it all fits perfectly, because losing Zack is what makes Cloud hollow with no feelings and completely messed up memories. So let's take a step back, because I know that you're asking at this point, why are we even talking about this song in the context of this video? Well, we're doing it because this is one of the many clues that help us understand Zack's memory appearing at the edge of the expressway to begin with. As I said earlier, the timing and location of the Singularity are very important. Cloud forgets about Zack sometime when he enters Midgar, and in the ending of Crisis Core, we actually see him acting relatively normally, but we know that afterwards he blocks every single memory of Zack, takes on his identity to cope with the trauma and pain of losing him, and basically lives in his own delusional world. So, for Cloud, Zack never existed up to this point of the Midgar portion, and from the original game we know that he won't remember Zack until very late in the story. This is why the location is extremely important, and I know that my next point will seem like a stretch, but personally, this is the only way I'm able to make sense of Zack's memory appearing here before the Singularity, of the meaning behind the song, and more importantly, of what Cloud is going through at this moment, so bear with me. As we said, the party is about to leave Midgar, here in the expressway, and eventually reaching this extremely important location. It might seem hard to believe at first, but this is very likely either Zack's grave, or at least somewhere extremely close to it. yes, we are effectively approaching the location of Zack's last stand, where this will potentially be the best chance for Cloud's mind to bring back this hidden memory and help him retrieve his own identity. This is almost an opportunity for Cloud's mind to shock him back into reality. And if you're still wondering how this is possible, then there are many clues for this actually. The first one is, as we said, the location itself, this cliff where the party stands at the end of Remake, which is extremely similar to the one where Zack dies in the ending of Crisis Core. The second one has to do with Aerith, who feels the presence of Zack and mentions missing the steel sky.
I miss it. The steel sky.
For me, the fact that they went back and changed the translation here is not innocent at all, because Zack does talk about the sky frightening Aerith when he is about to die in Crisis Core, and he does that in probably the exact same location where Aerith feels this presence. This connection is clearly intentional. The third and final hint is more around the setting, with the rain obviously, and just the whole mood of the final remake cutscene mirroring that of Crisis Core, which represents an extremely impactful and important moment in Cloud's backstory. So if we want, the real difference between Remake and the OG in my opinion is not that the party went into the Singularity and defeated Destiny at the edge of Midgar, but rather that Remake recognized the importance of Cloud leaving the city as a major event that could help trigger Zack's memory inside his own mind, and just decided to dramatically expand on it. Think of this as the game answering the following question. If Cloud and the party left Midgar and passed by Zack's grave, then surely Cloud must have felt something. And if what we're saying here is true, then this is all simply Remake improving on that and showing us that Zack's memory was still at least somewhere inside Cloud's subconscious, and that he's just not explicitly recognizing it or even aware of what is happening inside his own mind. And the reason Cloud is blind to all of this is precisely due to the influence of the Genova cells and or Sephiroth, because for both, Cloud is fine as he is for now. He is living in his own delusional bubble where Zack didn't even exist, and he should absolutely not remember anything for their plan to work. He actually needs to let go of the past, and as Sephiroth himself says, Cloud should defy destiny and whatnot, and should this world be unmade, so too shall her children. This sentence is probably the most cryptic line in the whole game so far, but my best guess is that yeah, if this delusional world that Cloud lives in is destroyed, as in he remembers Zack, goes through the grief process and finds himself again, then he can't be controlled by the Genova cells and Sephiroth anymore, which is actually what ends up happening in the OG as we know. And this is also why the Genova cells probably make Cloud think that he sees Sephiroth confronting him here at the edge of the expressway, trying to lure him further to this black side of the livestream to control him from the inside and make him oblivious to this memory as he is about to pass by Zack's grave. The good news is that Aerith somehow recognizes this.
All these moments and memories, precious and fleeting, they're like rain rolling off his back. And when they're gone, he won't cry or shout or anything.
Even if she's not 100% conscious of this process herself. She says that this is the point of no return, as in if Cloud goes there and is still oblivious, then it's game over, but she also needs to find an alternative solution. And this is likely why she hesitates at first, not knowing what to do, and gets this intuition or whatever it is, probably from the real consciousness of Aerith pulling the strings from somewhere, or just because she's still an ancient at the end of the day.
Follow them, the yellow flowers.
And she casts this white spell in the portal, purifying it and paving the way for Cloud sort of, shielding him from these illusions. Everything that follows is then just about making Cloud defy reality and not destiny. And as soon as you swap those words, it actually becomes much easier to understand. So if we really want to summarize what this whole Singularity portion and illusion represents, then it's basically this fracture inside Cloud's mind due to the paradox of Zack's memory still inside his own subconscious. This is also why we have two factions of Whispers in Rebirth, Black and White, pulling him between reality and fiction. And more importantly, because of this fracture and him remembering Sephiroth very vividly in that final fight in Remake, as well as this big explosion, Cloud's mind possibly has a crisis. It sort of doesn't know who Cloud is anymore, and this leads to two things in my opinion. The first one is the creation of these dream worlds because of his now very weak sense of reality, and his consciousness possibly traveling all the way to the edge of creation because of the huge crisis that it ends up facing. And talking about dream worlds, the simple answer is that this mechanism is probably what leads to the creation of the Terrier world in the first place. I also think that this is very likely still thanks to Aerith, who might be safeguarding Zack's memory inside Cloud's mind in some form, so that it's not lost forever and that he can find his way back later on. This is heavily implied by the visual cues throughout the dream worlds and just the fact that she brings Cloud to one of those dream worlds at the end of Rebirth, but more on that later. Her involvement is also heavily implied to be important in that final remake cutscene, where she and Cloud react in two completely different ways. First of all, because he's in denial, Cloud doesn't flinch when passing by Zack's grave, while Aerith on the other hand feels his presence, the weight of what happened here, even talking about the steel sky as we said, directly referencing the words Zack mentioned when he died here. I really recommend rewatching this cutscene and the whole remake ending with this perspective, and if you can, even looking up the lyrics of Hollow to see the hidden meaning, because this portion for me is extremely deep, sad, and just impactful when we know who Cloud is and what his backstory is. Now, if the Terrier world is simply the result of this memory of Zack surviving inside Cloud's mind or subconscious, then what about Biggs, who also happens to be in the same world? Well, the thing is, fate did not save Biggs. There was no reason for him to actually survive, and he says that himself. He even gets the most NPC deaths possible in Rebirth. Biggs is in no way important to the fate or destiny of the planet. But the writers still kept him around so that they can both throw us off, but also give us a huge clue on what these dream worlds are supposed to represent. And this is where we talk briefly about the second big change that Remake was supposedly introducing, the dream worlds and Terrier being at the center of them. As we said, there is something very weird about the whole arc of Biggs in the game. He first dies in the pillar in Remake, with Cloud witnessing his death. Biggs asks Cloud to look after the children in the orphanage, and Cloud shrugs it off, almost trying to convince Biggs that this is not over and that he will make it.
The Leaf House. It's an orphanage. The kids, they're great. I used to visit.
That you'll have to do yourself.
But the most telling hint that something is off is Cloud's reaction when Biggs finally passes away.
This isn't over.
Cloud shakes his head and gets up, all of a sudden, with no visible sadness or emotion, back to his soulless soldier robot self, almost as if he's already over the moment, or denying what he just saw. This scene initially looks very innocent on your first playthrough, but when you remember that this is a character with a clear history of repressing real loss and death happening in front of him, it becomes quite messed up, and that denial of reality is what Sephiroth actually uses against Cloud in his trial at the Temple of the Ancients. He reminds him how his friends died and he didn't shed a tear, that he's empty and that many people died because of his own actions. He's once again trying to keep him deep into this world of denial and make him buy into the idea that he actually has no feelings. This is a huge contrast to everything that the rest of the party goes through in their own trials at the temple, being reminded of real loss they experienced, how they processed it, and how it ended up making them stronger. But back to Cloud, I really hope you didn't miss this detail. Biggs being enveloped and taken away by Whispers during Cloud's trial again, just like Biggs himself remembers when talking to Zack about how he was saved in the Terrier world. This is extremely telling and a huge hint that something is off in regards to Biggs and how Cloud perceives his fate overall. The second part of the Biggs puzzle is actually earlier, at the beginning of Cloud's trial, so let's rewind a bit. Cloud sees a dying Biggs inside the reactor, which is something that never happened in Remake. Why is Biggs of all people here? Nothing strange initially until you realize that Biggs also dies inside the reactor in one of Zack's worlds, this deviation from Terrier. And as I said, the fact that Biggs himself keeps wondering what he is doing here, why would fate save him specifically, with visibly no defining role for him to play, is extremely telling and an invitation for us to think about his importance, or lack thereof, and what he could mean for the story. Of course, as long as we don't have a full official confirmation from the game on what the meaning of the Dream Worlds is, then it's hard to determine who actually saved Biggs. But it's either Aerith, at the same time she saved that memory of Zack, seeing how Cloud repressed the death of Biggs too, or it could just be collateral damage from whatever happened to Cloud's mind at the edge of Midgar. It doesn't really matter because the end result is the same. There is one difference versus Zack, however, which is that even though Cloud's mind is confused about him, not remembering whether Biggs died and if so where, one of the layers of his subconscious actually does figure it out and kills him off in the Pug world, almost reconciling Cloud's version with reality. And if I was to guess why that happened, then it's probably because Cloud was around Tifa and Barrett all this time, and they were clearly talking about the losses of Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, whereas with Zack, it's one, a huge loss to Cloud, which also has huge consequences on the story, and two, this is something that Tifa and Aerith are being very secretive about throughout the whole game, almost scared of Cloud's reaction if they try to remind him, so he has no clue to go off that something is weird around his recollection of who Zack is and what his fate was. This is best portrayed in Gongaga, which is an extremely important plot point, but we'll talk about that in a minute. This is why the trial basically confirms the role of Biggs. Biggs dying in those two locations, both in the Dream Worlds and Cloud's trial, is as clear as it gets that these dreams or memories are those of Cloud rather than that of the planet or objective realities existing somewhere. Now, you might ask, why didn't the same happen with Wedge and Jesse, which is a very valid question. First of all, with Wedge, Cloud didn't experience his death firsthand, nor did the party, so it's kind of irrelevant. Whereas for Jesse, he actually did, but the difference is that he was not alone with her. Cloud almost sheds a tear seeing Jesse die, and he behaves quite differently from Biggs' death. He clearly recognizes the moment. But the reason he's even able to feel that emotion is probably because he has Tifa with him and he can actually see her pain and sort of feed off her reaction. With Tifa by his side, Cloud's broken mind is almost grounded into some sense of reality. He's able to feel pain, he's able to start the grieving process when he sees Jesse die. Sadly, we all know that Cloud doesn't feed off the reaction of his friends at the Forgotten Capital when it mattered most, because it's basically completely messed up by then. And we will absolutely talk about that whole sequence to try to make sense of it. We can't possibly end this video anywhere, right, other than the Forgotten Capital. But before that, let's tie up some other loose ends, which relate to the questions we asked earlier in the video. Let's look back at some key moments in both Remake and Rebirth in the context of this theory, and let's start with the Whispers, which appear very early on in the game. In my opinion, Whispers can be understood in a couple of ways. Either voices from the live stream, maybe of deceased souls or whatever, guiding Cloud and keeping the Beagle world close to reality, or maybe even his own internal monologue, trying to bring his perception back to the real world. Aerith definitely has a lot to do with it, because coming in contact with her early on allows him to see the Whispers, and for his consciousness to have a way back to some sort of reality. It's also entirely possible that the Beagle world is a combination of real events when Cloud's mental state is okay, and the delusional reality he lives in when he has these visions and flashes, like the first one in Chapter 2 for instance. This whole world is sort of built on the lie that Zack never existed, but it doesn't mean that Cloud's mind is not trying to resurface back to reality. I also want to highlight the fact that the Whispers behave weirdly a couple of times in Remake. In the morning of this Sector 5 bombing mission, almost stopping Tifa and Cloud from joining Avalanche, which doesn't really make sense if they're trying to correct course, and then also when Tifa, Cloud, and Aerith are coming back to Sector 7 later on. In both cases, there is this purple Spectre who probably has something to do with Genova and or Sephiroth once again, taking over the Whispers and likely making them behave differently, maybe trying to push them not to correct the events, but rather keep Cloud in this fictional world. In fact, the Whispers are only able to achieve what they set out to do in the morning of the Sector 5 bombing mission once this purple Spectre is defeated, injuring Jesse and paving the way for Cloud to go on the mission as he should have. And a Jenova influence shouldn't be a surprise here at all really, because despite initially trying to correct the events, the Whispers seem to be more and more under Jenova and Sephiroth's control as the game progresses, with all of that culminating at the edge of the expressway of course. And as we said earlier, the mental crisis in Cloud's subconscious in the Singularity leads to this duality, his mind being torn between the White Whispers clearly linked to Aerith and possibly pointing towards reality, and the Black Whispers controlled by Sephiroth and obviously leading to illusions. Both of them intervene a bit in Rebirth, especially towards the end, and it's very easy to understand why they do so. First in the Gongaga reactor, where the mention of Zack opens another fracture in Cloud's mind, exploded by Jenova cells and Sephiroth, leading him to the reactor through the Black Whispers and pushing him to attack Tifa. Anything really to just turn him into a monster in his own head.
Your son, would you? Zack?
But if he's been gone this long, the man is dead. Sorry. I'm gonna go lie down.
How you figure? Come. It's time.
Perhaps.
This is an incident which I've already said is very questionable given a few reasons. The fact that it happens after Cloud's mental state is extremely vulnerable again. Tifa seeing her memories from his point of view. No one talking about him attacking her afterwards. These secret words that Aerith says to Tifa when she wakes up. Cloud's mind totally breaking down when he thinks she's dead, just like he would probably have done once Zack died. And of course, the fact that the White Whispers literally revived Tifa here, almost cheating to keep Cloud sane. And the last hint that something's off there is Bugenhagen, of all people, dismissing all of that.
A fascinating account. Such grand illusions could be a sign of Mako poisoning. Please escort this young lady to our seminar room, would you?
And sending the party to the seminar room, where you can hear about these dream worlds from the now famous Cosmo Canyon NPC. All of this is just not so subtle hints that something is really wrong with that whole Gongaga sequence. Cloud himself notes how the amount of Mako inside the reactor itself is just a disaster waiting to happen.
Too much Mako here.
Another one of those questionable sequences is actually after the Red 13 portion in Cosmo Canyon at the Cave of the Gi.
We'll back you up for 2,000.
No. This one's free.
It all once again starts with Sephiroth appearing and pulling Cloud somewhere. This space, which just screams illusion inside the livestream to me, Cloud's mind or whatever this is. And because we're inside of it, Aerith actually feels one of these dream worlds and is able to communicate or feel Zack's presence from Terrier. Later on, everyone is teleported back to the cave the following morning in strange fashion, with no questions asked about what they've just gone through. It's all very likely just a trick by Sephiroth and Jenova cells to plant the idea of the black materia inside Cloud's mind. And the final one I want to talk about before we wrap up this section cannot be anything else other than the huge clue they've left us at the Gold Saucer of all places, twice in Rebirth, where they show us Cloud's consciousness shifting between Beagle and Terrier.
More tired than I thought.
Sorry, man. Feel like I failed you. Sorry, man. Feel like I failed you.
Not bad, kid. Not bad, kid.
Again, one of those sequences which just look weird at first, but that only makes sense once you understand or assume that everything is probably about Cloud in Remake and Rebirth. His delusion, of course, reaches its peak in the last chapter, where we see him experience and create one of these dream worlds in the Forgotten Capital. So let's talk about that.
Sometimes, I don't even know who I am. I forget things everyone else remembers just fine. And know things I've got no right knowing. It's like there's different people inside of me. And the worst part is, I can't even tell where they end and I begin.
Aerith's role in Remake is well documented. From the start, she knows more than anyone else. Even Sephiroth later on tells her that he underestimated her. But the thing is, I think we also did. Aerith already achieved two major things before we even started Rebirth. She allowed Cloud to see the Whispers when he came in contact with her in Chapter 2 of Remake, and she purified the Singularity, possibly saving Zack's memory in the process and paving a way for Cloud's mind to see reality, the White Whispers, to eventually be able to come back to his real self. But her biggest intervention happens much later when Cloud gets the Black Materia. She brings him into this dream which she obviously says is hers, but is that really the case? When we are in the same setting, the same room as the Terrier world, Cloud's dream, we are essentially in a deviation from that world. Going back to how Zack was saved, this might be the biggest hint that Aerith did it, keeping this world somewhat alive and preparing it to be able to help Cloud later on, because, well, she's an ancient and they just know things. Cloud even has a very weird reaction when he first wakes up, looking completely weak and lost, probably because of everything that just happened to him after he got his hands on the Black Materia. But then when we shift inside of him, we see a different Cloud, much more sane and, let's say, normal and back to his calm and collected self that we've been playing as since the beginning of Remake. Aerith brought Cloud here for a few reasons. The first one is obviously going on this date with him and confessing her feelings, but the second and most important one is preparing him to lose her. The whole dream is filled with foreshadowing, a world that has accepted its fate, characters telling Cloud and Aerith that they look like they're at a funeral. And whatever he decides, it doesn't matter. The outcome is the same, he can't change fate, and maybe that's what Aerith wants his subconscious to see and remember somehow. My guess is that this dream will be extremely important when the time comes to remind Cloud of what Aerith told him, that she knew her fate, accepted it, and never blamed him or wanted him to blame himself. Of course, there is also the small detail that she sends him back with the pure white materia. Through this dream, Aerith essentially plants the idea of loss inside Cloud's mind. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's one of the moments where the expansions that the Retrilogies bring in add so many layers to the FF7 story and is actually extremely consistent with it and its themes. Unfortunately for Cloud, however, this is helpful but still not enough. And the reason is that Sephiroth also has plans of his own, catching Cloud here and telling him what is possibly the biggest lie in the game so far. After Aerith sent him away, Cloud is actually in a very dangerous place. He's lost in what could be the livestream, visibly starting in the white side of it, as portrayed by the Whispers guiding him, before Sephiroth and his Black Whispers intervene. This scene is one of those that were extremely underwhelming for me personally. I'm pretty sure we were all finally waiting for some sort of explanation on what is happening in Remake, only to end up with even more questions after the sequence. And the reason for that is simply because it's a trick that Jenova and or Sephiroth are again using to keep Cloud and us in the dark a little bit more. Aerith's actions right before were kind of dangerous for Sephiroth and might have paved the way for Cloud to heal, which is why he needs to act here. The goal of these illusions that the Jenova cells are playing on Cloud is still very simple. If Cloud does believe that the planet is made up of an infinity of worlds, which are all meaningless and destined to die, then reality, or a true objective version of the events, as in the real world, just doesn't exist anymore for him. He becomes much more easy to manipulate, and nothing matters to him anymore. Not Zack and Aerith's death, not his friends, not even himself. He basically becomes a monster, like many other soldiers or clones before him. We actually see quite a few interesting things in this sequence, which we can't cover in detail, but this vision with himself as a clone heading for the reunion is fascinating. If you want some speculation, I'm sure that we will see him playing this role again in part 3, maybe reliving this scene shot for shot when he's either getting close to the northern crater or when Sephiroth convinces him that he's just a clone who never existed, and that all of his memories were those of Zack, just like in the original. There is also the very subtle thing that Sephiroth does here, merging these worlds in front of Cloud. It's hard to say what this is. It could be just to demonstrate what he means by the reunion, but it's also possible that this new reality he creates is what he's about to make Cloud experience in a minute. After all, Sephiroth almost tricks him into attacking him and basically leads him to where he wants him to be, the world that he wants him to land in. This is what the reunion of worlds really means. It's not about destiny or merging timelines within the planet itself. It's simply about confusing Cloud as much as possible, making him experience these paradoxical worlds until his sense of reality completely breaks down, which we know does happen in the OG and will surely happen in Part 3. The contrast between the preparations of both Aerith and Sephiroth for Cloud is exactly why the Forgotten Capital sequence plays the way it does and why it's so confusing. When the party reaches the city, as we saw before, they go through something very similar to the Singularity in Remake, with Cloud hearing Sephiroth's voice inside his head, leading to the environment changing, the same meteor illusion foreshadowing being shown, and Sephiroth basically controlling Cloud's perception once again. The behavior of the Whispers on the way to the altar is also extremely telling. You have the Black Whispers paving the way for Cloud, isolating him from his friends, while the White Whispers are trying to stop them from progressing. The White Whispers do not want the party to breach fate, as in, they don't want Cloud to experience an illusion at the altar. This is also probably symbolized by the fact that Aerith does cast this white spell on the portal, just like she did back in the Singularity at the end of Remake.
Aerith!
Cloud! Now! She needs you. Go.
Now, the thing is, up to this point in both games, we were partially seeing this paradox play out inside Cloud's head, reliving some things from his perspective. But the beauty of Rebirth is that at the Forgotten Capital, it reaches a completely new level, and the story just becomes way more immersive than ever before. The game decides to put us entirely in Cloud's shoes, to make us see things with his broken perception, to keep us stuck between these merged worlds and experience both realities in real time, one where Aerith will die and one where she will live. If we saw Cloud dream of these worlds before or just peek into them, here we actually see him create a new one, by his sheer will or delusion. Aerith is not alive anywhere. I mean, yes, her spirit is probably in the livestream and reaching out to her friends and will still do the role that she did in the OG, actually saving the planet. But this world where she is physically alive is just Cloud's dream, based on this repetitive pattern of refusing the truth, of denying loss, and blocking it from his mind, due to both the enormous pain that the previous losses brought on him, of course, and his completely broken mind after years of being drowned in Mako. I know that this has been said a lot, but in a way, Cloud is us the players, refusing to let go of Aerith and partially Zack after all the promises that were made to us at the end of Remake. You can still see Cloud's subconscious trying to bring itself back to reality, to where his body really is, to the real feelings he's going through, those flashes that are shown to us, which are actually pretty accurate compared to the scenes in the original game. The reactions of his friends clearly show us the truth as well, with Aerith not being there anymore and everyone basically mourning her loss, and that Cloud is seemingly the only one now stuck between these two realities. The only person which reacts a bit differently other than Cloud is of course Tifa, with this scene being extremely intriguing. I don't think it's possible to entirely make sense of this for now, but we have to remember that Tifa also saw those memories from his point of view in Gongaga, and that she was also the only other character that the game focused on in the Singularity, other than Cloud again, when showing us the visions they were experiencing while fighting the Harbinger. I think that broadly, this is just setting up the fact that Tifa might be feeling what Cloud goes through to a certain degree, and seeing things that he sees, which will be extremely important to her, helping him repair his mind later on in Part 3. If you want even wilder speculation, then this could be a hint that she only sees all of this because she is with Cloud in the livestream during both games so far, inside the singularity of his mind, experiencing these dreams with him as he tries to repair himself. Again, very faithful to what happened in the original game. But back to the story, the main point is that timelines, worlds, versions of characters, none of this matters because we're in the exact same place where we were in the OG. Aerith is dead, Cloud's sense of reality is completely broken, and because of the illusions that he just experienced, his mind does the exact same thing it did back at the end of Remake. It faces another existential crisis, leading him to the edge of creation. Sephiroth waiting for Cloud at the edge of creation again is very easy to understand given what we saw in Remake. It's probably an attempt to entirely break his mind once again. It also works as a metaphor of how Jenova cells try to completely take over Cloud from the inside, while his real self just fights back every time. The question, however, is what is Zack doing here? Remember, this version of Zack comes from the Johnny Corgi world, which is just a variation from Terrier due to Zack's choices, right? This is still the same memory that Aerith saved inside Cloud's mind. He is initially sent away by Sephiroth to the black side of the livestream, while Aerith once again saves the day. This version of him should not be lost forever, as we said, because that would lead to Cloud being in eternal denial, so Aerith simply guides Zack so that he can find Cloud's real self and help him fight back against Sephiroth. The meaning behind this is absolutely beautiful. This whole sequence again shows us how the Zack identity that Cloud takes on, despite being a lie, is still extremely crucial to keeping him going. In fact, a lot of us have been wondering what his role will be in Remake, what his legacy will be, how he can be a hero this time around. And the answer is that it's the same role he's played in the original story. Zack's legacy is that his will and identity and determination help Cloud and give him the strength to go on. Zack is a hero at the end of the day, and the reason Remake brings all of these changes, other than keeping us engaged of course, is to dramatically expand on how he is able to help Cloud. Because after all, we don't really see this in the original game. Another beautiful thing is that everyone in all layers of Cloud's consciousness are helping him against Sephiroth in that final battle. And nothing represents that more than Aerith, probably the real one, dead Aerith from the livestream, appearing and protecting Cloud's mind from yet another Sephiroth trick. This whole sequence of fights is just extremely emotional and is what the trilogy adds to FF7. I know this isn't the case for everyone, but this sort of expansion and all the hidden layers is why I'm personally obsessed with this reimagining, because its whole point is to reinforce the themes of the 1997 game. It also takes concepts which were really hard to grasp back then, such as the livestream, consciousness, and maybe intuition, and expands on them in a very immersive and convincing way. The original story showed us that loss is inevitable and necessary for the cycle of life and death. It was a bit dark at times, and there were events that were difficult to accept, both for characters and us as players. Instead of going against this, the Remake project is telling us that this is okay, that those we mourn are not entirely gone, that their memories stay with us, that their dreams can actually inspire us and complement our own. Just like Zack with Cloud, and obviously, depending on your afterlife beliefs, that those who die could still be helping us in ways that our perception and consciousness is not able to realize at the moment, like what Aerith does with Cloud. This is also a way to give the characters a more peaceful perspective on the not-so-happy ending of the original game, rather than a completely new one. And I think this is what Kitase means when he says that he wants to give these characters a happy ending. We're just taking those words and other things they say, if you ask me, way too literally. Sadly, it's still a bit early for Cloud to realize all of this at the end of Rebirth, maybe just like we didn't on our first playthrough because we were too immersed, too stubborn to actually let go of Aerith. For instance, we were looking for any hint that she's still alive somewhere, and obsessing over the two versions of her that we see in the last cutscene. And not that it matters because she's gone anyways, but this duality of Aerith perfectly represents Cloud's broken perception, a real version of herself. Roman is a spirit reaching out to her friends to reassure them, and the delusional version that Cloud thinks he saved. The hollow materia is another big reminder, hopefully for him in part 3, that he's still empty and that he represses real feelings and emotions due to his mind being afraid of facing the pain of letting go and actually experiencing grief. As long as he doesn't do that, he will never come back to his real self. Of course, because we know the story, we know that the real Cloud is still somewhere inside. Maybe it's him here at the edge of creation, trapped, fighting Sephiroth forever and trying to resurface back and give us what will be probably one of the most satisfying payoff moments in video game history. Now, when it comes to the fate of the real Zack, not the memory that was saved, things are still blurry. The real Zack is dead. This is necessary for FF7 to be what it is, and for Cloud to heal and become his overpowered self. But more than that, I think we already saw him, before Rebirth, moving on in the afterlife, going back to the one safe place he knows, looking for someone who isn't there yet, rather than being trapped inside someone's dream. If this is true, and this scene represents the journey of the real Zack after he died, then again, it's just brilliant storytelling. It's the writers going the extra mile on a story that so many of us knew very well for decades, and still surprising us in ways we did not know were possible.
Aerith?
There are many more layers and hints that we can talk about with this view in mind, but the video is already super long, so I'll leave it at this for now. Thank you so much for tagging along, and I hope that I was able to convey to you at least 10% of why I'm obsessed with this game and story. If this interpretation is still not convincing enough, then fine, I just hope that it can at the very least make you see the story from a different perspective going forward while we wait for part 3. Take care.